4 years ago, my wife, Anna, and I celebrated our fifth anniversary with a trip to the rugged coastline of Acadia National Park in Maine. It was still early in the pandemic, and the opportunity to escape the grind of work, parenting our toddler, and the suffocating monotony of life at home was irresistible. We'd been dreaming of this trip for months, a mix of adventure and relaxation with plenty of time to recharge. We split the trip into two parts. The first leg was a kayak camping excursion around the waters of Frenchman Bay, exploring its secluded islands and dramatic cliffs. The second was a cozy stay at a historic inn in Bar Harbor, where we'd planned to sip wine by a fireplace and eat our weight in fresh lobster rolls. The adventure began with an ambitious plan: kayak to a remote island campsite and spend 2 nights immersed in nature. Our rented tandem kayak, a sturdy but unwieldy beast, was loaded with all our food, camping gear, and a couple of boxed wines for good measure. The paddle out to the island took over 3 hours, a mix of hard work and awe as we glided past jagged cliffs and hidden coves. The campsite was nothing short of magical. Tucked into a grove of pines, it overlooked a quiet bay framed by rocky shores. From the beach, we could see the faint outline of Mount Desert Island on the horizon, shrouded in mist. That first night, we sat by a crackling fire, listening to the eerie calls of loons echo across the water. The world felt distant, and we felt invincible. The next morning, we woke up to brilliant sunshine, slung over but eager to explore. Our plan was to paddle along the coast, weaving through the sea stacks and caves that dotted the shoreline. It was a perfect day. Calm waters, a gentle breeze, and a clear blue sky. We stopped at small beaches to snack on trail mix and marvel at the beauty around us. By mid-afternoon, it was time to head back. We stood on a pebbled beach, mapping out our return route. The original plan was to retrace our path along the coast and make a short, open water crossing back to the island. But as we looked across the bay, we saw a shortcut. A straight shot of open water directly to our campsite. It would save time and effort, and we were feeling confident after a full day of paddling. We launched the kayak and began the crossing. At first, it was exhilarating. The waves were gentle and we made steady progress. But as we moved farther from shore, the weather began to shift. The breeze turned into a headwind. The waves grew choppier, spraying cold water into the kayak. The sky darkened as thick clouds rolled in, swallowing the sun. We paddled harder, determined to push through, but the progress we'd made earlier started to evaporate. I don't know exactly when it hit me, but at some point I realized we weren't moving forward anymore. I glanced at the distant cliffs on my left, only to notice they hadn't budged. We were stuck, paddling in place, as the wind and current conspired against us. We didn't say much. Anna and I are both stubborn, and neither of us wanted to admit we'd made a mistake. We kept paddling. Minutes turned into hours. My arms burned with every stroke, and my back ached from leaning forward. Anna, in the front, was focused and silent, her strokes growing slower as exhaustion set in. At one point, she looked over her shoulder and shouted, "Are we even moving?" "No," I admitted, the wind stealing my voice as soon as I said it. To make matters worse, the kayak was taking on water. I was sitting in the back, and it had pooled around me, soaking my legs in the frigid 50-degree water. When I realized how much water we had, I grabbed Anna's water bottle, emptied it, and started bailing. "What the hell are you doing?" she yelled. "It's sinking back here." I shouted back, but it was futile. The waves splashed faster than I could bail, and I gave up, returning to paddling with water sloshing around my waist. We kept going. We didn't talk about it, but we both knew the stakes. If we capsized out here, there would be no one to help us. The rental shop had packed up for the season, and we hadn't seen another boat in hours. There was no way to get to shore, just steep cliffs and jagged rocks on either side. The wind howled and the waves seemed to grow larger, each one threatening to flip us over. I thought about our daughter. I thought about the cozy inn waiting for us in Bar Harbor. I thought about how stupid we were to challenge the Atlantic like this. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the silhouette of the island came into view. We were almost there, but the bay was still a gauntlet of whitecaps. With the last reserves of our strength, we pushed through, landing on the rocky shore just as the last light of day faded. We rolled out of the kayak and collapsed onto the beach, soaked and shaking. My watch was dead, but Anna's phone told us it was after 8 p.m. We'd been paddling for over 5 hours. The adrenaline that had kept us going evaporated, leaving us shivering and dazed. We stripped off our wet clothes and wrapped ourselves in every dry layer we had. Somehow we managed to build a fire and eat, but we were too exhausted to talk much. That night, as we lay in the tent, listening to the wind howl through the trees, I couldn't stop thinking about how close we'd come to disaster. The ocean didn't care about our plans, our experience, or our confidence. We were nothing to it. The next morning, we portaged the kayak across the island to avoid another open water crossing. When we finally made it back to the mainland, I sat in the car and cried. For days afterward, I could still feel the phantom waves rocking me back and forth, even when I stood still. It was a humbling reminder of the power of the ocean and our own fragility. The following year, we celebrated our anniversary at a cabin by a quiet lake, with no kayaks in sight. We haven't been back to the ocean since. My partner Alex and I had agreed to house sit for a friend named Derek while he was traveling abroad for work. His sprawling, early 19th century farmhouse, nestled in the rolling hills of western Vermont, seemed like the perfect retreat from the chaos of city life. The house was stunning, antique charm blended with modern renovations, but it had a certain eeriness to it, the kind of unsettling quiet that only an old house in the middle of nowhere can offer. Still, we couldn't resist. Derek's two little dogs needed company, and we were more than ready for a break. We left New York City late in the afternoon, rented car packed with enough snacks, books, and streaming downloads to keep us entertained during our stay. It was a long drive through winding roads and dark woods. By the time we reached the final stretch, a narrow, serpentine road cut into the side of a mountain, it was pitch black. Alex had taken over driving while I dozed off, and we were just a few miles from Derek's house when something jolted us both awake. It was a loud, throaty roar, an engine revving at full tilt. A sports car, maybe a Camaro or an old Mustang, came hurtling up behind us out of nowhere. The headlights flared in our rearview mirror like a predator locking onto prey. The driver wasn't slowing down. "Alex, watch out!" I yelled as the car swerved into the opposite lane, trying to pass us on the left. We were on a mountain road. One side hugged a rocky slope, and the other dropped straight into darkness. Alex instinctively yanked the wheel to the right and slammed on the brakes. The car shot past us, veering dangerously close to clipping our front bumper. The sheer speed and recklessness left a shockwave of wind in its wake. We skidded to a stop, one wheel teetering on the edge of a shallow ditch. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. For a moment, the world went silent, save for our own shaky breathing. Then, as if on cue, red and blue lights exploded behind us. A police cruiser screamed past, sirens wailing, in pursuit of the Mustang. We sat there, trembling, trying to process what had just happened. Alex finally pulled the car back onto the road, muttering something about the cops catching that lunatic. I nodded, still too rattled to speak. We continued driving, the narrow road stretching endlessly ahead. A few minutes later, two more cop cars raced by, their lights cutting through the darkness. When we were about half a mile from Derek's house, we saw them. 3 police cruisers surrounding a massive pickup truck pulled off to the side of the road. "Wait," Alex said, squinting as we slowed down to pass. "That's not the Mustang." Sure enough, it wasn't. The driver of the truck looked terrified, his hands raised in what appeared to be a gesture of surrender. "Did they pull over the wrong guy?" I asked. We drove on, confused, and soon spotted Derek's house just ahead on the right. As we approached the driveway, I was double-checking Derek's instructions about opening the gate when Alex's voice cut through my thoughts. "Is that—" I looked up and froze. Parked across the street from Derek's driveway was the Mustang. The driver's side door was open, and a figure sat inside, bathed in the car's interior light. "Keep driving," I said, panic tightening my throat. But it was too late. We had already started turning into the driveway. I had no choice but to get out and open the gate. My pulse raced as I unlatched it, all the while trying not to look at the man in the car. But I couldn't help myself. He was staring at me. His face was pale and expressionless, except for his eyes, which glinted with something I couldn't quite place. Malice? Curiosity? Whatever it was, it made my skin crawl. I threw the gate open and jumped back into the car as quickly as I could. Alex drove up the long driveway and we scrambled to unlock the front door. Once inside, we bolted the door behind us and immediately turned off every light in the house. The dogs were barking like mad, but their high-pitched yaps offered little comfort. We peeked out from behind the curtains in the upstairs bedroom, clutching the only weapons we could find, a dull kitchen knife for Alex and a hammer for me. The Mustang was still there, its interior light glowing faintly in the darkness. We watched for what felt like hours, but the car never moved. Then, without warning, the light blinked off. I wanted to believe he had driven away, but we hadn't heard an engine. The silence outside felt heavy, oppressive. Eventually, exhaustion won out. We huddled together in the upstairs bedroom, the dogs nestled between us, and fell asleep to the comforting absurdity of an old comedy on Alex's laptop. When we woke up a few hours later, every light in the house was on. At first, I thought we must have forgotten to turn them off in our panic. But no, the lights had been off when we went to bed. And the sound. It started low, almost like a hum, but quickly grew into a bone-chilling howl that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The dogs were barking again, their small bodies trembling with fear. Then the lights began to flicker, one by one, until the house was plunged into complete darkness. We didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, the sun rose on a perfectly ordinary day. The lights worked, the dogs were calm, the house felt normal, as if the events of the previous night had been nothing more than a bad dream. But when we drove into town for coffee, we overheard a chilling conversation. A man driving a Mustang had gone off the road and died the night before, just a few miles from where we'd seen the car parked. We stayed at Derek's house for the rest of the week, but we never felt truly alone. At night, we kept the lights on and the dogs close, and we avoided looking out the windows. To this day, we don't know who or what we saw that night. This story didn't exist even a week ago. I've created this burner account specifically to share it because it's been consuming my thoughts. I'll use pseudonyms and keep some details vague since it's still an active investigation, but I need to get this off my chest. I live in a modern, mid-rise condominium in the heart of Rivermill, a quiet, affluent neighborhood in a bustling metropolitan area. The building is sleek, filled with professionals and retirees, people who value their privacy. It's the kind of place where you know faces but rarely names, where life hums along smoothly without drama or surprises. That was until last Monday. I stepped off the elevator after work and was hit by a smell. At first, I thought someone had overcooked cabbage or Brussels sprouts, but there was an edge to it that turned my stomach. When I got inside my apartment, I told my spouse, Alex, something smells off in the hallway, like maybe someone burned food or... I trailed off, not wanting to voice the darker thought that crept into my mind. Alex joked that it might be a dead animal stuck somewhere, but I wasn't so sure. By Tuesday, Alex ran some errands and confirmed it. That smell isn't just off, it's wrong. Still, we brushed it aside. People burn things, plumbing can act up. These things usually pass. But by Saturday, the smell had intensified. It was a sunny day, warm for October, and Alex was working on a project, moving between our unit and the courtyard below. The first time they came back inside, they said, "It's worse out there today." We half joked about it being a dead body, but dismissed it just as quickly. The second time Alex came back, I heard voices in the hallway. Our building is typically silent, so I asked if someone was having a party. Alex shook their head. No, a group of neighbors is going door to door trying to figure out where the smell is coming from. Apparently, someone tried to show an apartment downstairs, and the smell was so bad, they couldn't even step inside. The third time Alex returned, they confirmed the source. Unit 307, 3 doors down from us, directly between our unit and the elevator. Riley, one of the HOA board members, was fetching the spare keys to check inside. The hallway was now filled with murmuring neighbors, some visibly distressed. And then, chaos. When Riley unlocked the door to Unit 307, the smell exploded into the hallway. It was like a physical presence, thick and suffocating. Neighbors quickly donned N95 masks or improvised with scarves and jackets. Alex, who spoke briefly with Riley, learned that the body of the unit's resident, a middle-aged man named Samuel, had been found in the bathtub. Riley was pale and shaken, confirming the authorities needed to be called immediately. The police arrived quickly, followed by CSI technicians. As they worked, the details began to emerge in fragments overheard in the hallway. Samuel's body had been there for over a week, maybe longer. He lived alone and had been renting the unit since the building opened nearly 18 years ago. The sparse state of his apartment was startling. No furniture aside from a single chair in the living room. On the refrigerator, there was a handwritten note: "In case of emergency, call the VA." Neighbors shared what little they knew about Samuel. He was a retired military veteran in his mid-50s. He kept to himself, rarely seen, but always polite when spoken to. Corey, who lived next door to him, mentioned that Samuel didn't even own a dining table. He lived an austere, solitary life. As unsettling as it was to learn the source of the smell, the situation took an even stranger turn the following day. On Sunday morning, a trail of blood was discovered in the building's main lobby. It stretched from the front door to the elevator and continued up to the third floor, stopping outside Unit 307. This was more than a week after Samuel's body had been removed. The building has a fire marshal on duty 24/7 due to ongoing construction, yet somehow no one had seen or heard anything unusual. Neighbors speculated wildly. Was it related to Samuel's death? A careless dog owner? But the blood wasn't consistent with an animal. It was smeared and pooling in places, like someone had been injured. The next morning, another blood trail appeared, this time leading to the top floor. The building's HOA sent out a curt email asking residents to clean up after themselves, but the tension in the building was palpable. Who was bleeding, and why weren't they seeking help? Meanwhile, the investigation into Samuel's death revealed more questions than answers. The VA, listed as his emergency contact, had no record of him. A neighbor ran a background check and found that Samuel had lived in several states before moving to Rivermill, but had no known associates in the area. His LinkedIn profile was sparse, showing a military history and a job that didn't seem current. It was as though he had existed only on paper. By Monday evening, the top floor's blood trail had been cleaned, but the sense of unease remained. Samuel's unit was still sealed as a crime scene, with detectives coming and going at odd hours. Rumors swirled. Was it a natural death? Foul play? The handwritten note on the refrigerator only deepened the mystery. The smell in the hallway has finally dissipated, but the memory of it lingers. I can't stop thinking about Samuel and the life he must have led. How does someone live in a building for nearly 2 decades and leave behind so few traces? No family, no friends, no one to notice when they're gone. And what about the blood trails? Occam's razor suggests Samuel's death was natural, maybe a heart attack or stroke, and the blood is just an unrelated, albeit bizarre, coincidence. But I can't shake the feeling that there's more to the story. Our hallway feels haunted now, not by a ghost, but by unanswered questions. Who was Samuel? And why does it feel like, aside from paying rent, he never existed at all? I know what I'm about to tell you sounds like something out of a classic ghost story, but it truly happened. And even now, nearly 30 years later, my husband and I still can't make sense of it. It was late one February night in 1996. We were driving home from visiting friends in a neighboring town. It had been a pleasant evening, good food, good conversation, but by the time we left, the temperature had plummeted to around 10 Griegs Fahrenheit. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones no matter how many layers you're wearing. We lived in a rural part of Maine, in a house at the end of a winding, wooded road called Hollow Creek Road. It was about midnight when we turned off the old county highway onto the narrow, unlit stretch that marked the final half-mile to our house. That first part of Hollow Creek Road was always eerie, even during the day. It curved past a tidal marsh and was lined with towering pine trees that formed a canopy overhead, muffling sound and light. At night, it was pitch black. No streetlights, no houses, just the faint reflection of the moon on the frozen marsh. As we emerged from the darkest part of the road and reached the first streetlight, a lone fixture marking the start of a small subdivision, we saw her. She was walking up the left-hand side of the road, her back to us, illuminated by our headlights. At first, we didn't fully register what we were seeing. My husband Sam slowed the car, and we both leaned forward, staring. The woman had long, flowing blonde hair that cascaded down her back, and she was wearing a thin, almost translucent dress or nightgown. The fabric clung to her figure, shimmering slightly in the light as if it were damp. She had no coat, no hat, no scarf, nothing to shield her from the biting cold. And the most unsettling detail, she was barefoot. Barefoot, in 10-degree weather. She walked with a slow, deliberate pace, as though she were strolling through a park on a warm summer evening. Her steps were unhurried, almost dreamlike, as she climbed the gentle slope ahead of us. Sam turned to me, his face pale. "Do you see this?" he whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. As we approached her, I felt a rising sense of dread. Something about her was off. She didn't turn around, didn't flinch at the sound of our car, didn't acknowledge us in any way. Her movements were too calm, too smooth, as though she were gliding rather than walking. We drove past her slowly, our headlights washing over her figure. My hands were gripping my knees, and I felt an overwhelming urge not to look back. Neither of us did. When we reached our driveway a few minutes later, we bolted into the house, locked the door behind us, and turned on every light. For the next hour, we sat in the living room, trying to make sense of what we'd just seen. "Maybe she was sleepwalking," Sam suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. "In a nightgown? In this weather?" I countered. Where would she even have come from? The marsh? We debated every possible explanation. Was she mentally ill? A runaway? Someone who couldn't feel pain or cold? But the more we thought about it, the less sense it made. There were no houses in the direction she'd been coming from, just the tidal marsh and the old highway. And how could anyone walk barefoot in those temperatures without showing any signs of discomfort? We considered calling the police, but what would we have said? That we'd seen a barefoot woman in a nightgown strolling down a deserted road at midnight? It sounded absurd, like the setup for a campfire ghost story. The next night, curiosity got the better of me. After dinner, I went outside and tried to walk barefoot on our driveway to see if it was possible. I didn't even make it 10 steps before the icy ground became unbearable. My feet ached from the cold, and I had to run back inside. "Not humanly possible," I told Sam when I came back in, shivering. We didn't see her again, but for weeks afterward, I felt uneasy every time I drove down Hollow Creek Road at night. I'd find myself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her figure illuminated in the taillights. Years later, I mentioned the incident to a neighbor who had lived in the area for decades. Her expression changed immediately. "You saw her," she said flatly. I blinked. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then told me about a young woman who had drowned in the tidal marsh back in the 1930s. The details were murky, something about a car accident and a failed rescue attempt, but ever since then, there had been occasional sightings of a barefoot woman in a white dress walking along the road near the marsh. "People say she's looking for her way home," my neighbor said, her voice low. "I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I know what I saw that night, and I know it wasn't something I'll ever forget."
John loved these woods, the quiet rustle of leaves underfoot, the distant call of birds. His dog Rex bounded ahead, tail wagging with unrestrained joy. But today, the forest felt different. An uneasy silence hung in the air, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath.
"Come on, Rex. Let's find something good today,"
he called, his voice echoing through the stillness. But as the sun dipped lower, John did not return home with Rex by his side. The search party gathered at dawn, a mix of concern and determination etched on their faces. Tom, John's closest friend, led the group. Rex was with them, guiding them deeper into the woods, nose to the ground.
"It's like he's still here, leading us,"
Tom whispered, glancing at the dog. Suddenly a chill ran through him as he spotted a bear, its eyes glinting before it vanished like a wisp of smoke. Tom staggered back, heart pounding, fear gripping him. The group stumbled upon a grim scene. The remains of John and Rex, torn and lifeless. An eerie silence enveloped them, the forest seemingly mourning its fallen companions. Tom knelt, tears blurring his vision.
"I'm so sorry, my friend,"
he murmured, picking up Rex's collar, vowing to find answers. Months later, Emily, John's widow, awoke to the sound of scratching. Her heart raced as she tiptoed to the window. There, staring back at her, was a bear, its breath fogging the glass, eyes like dark abysses.
No, it can't be.
She whispered, fear freezing her in place. The creature roared, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of her home. With trembling hands, Emily reached for the shotgun, her heart pounding in her ears. The bear's growls grew louder, closer. Just as panic threatened to overwhelm her, a familiar bark echoed through the night, Rex's spirit returning to protect her.
Go away, leave us alone,
she shouted, the gun heavy in her grip. Outside, the air crackled with tension. The ghost of John and Rex charged at the bear, a phantom battle unfolding before Emily's eyes. She watched, breathless, as the apparitions chased the beast into the woods, their forms flickering like candle flames. Some say it was a ghost bear, a spectral guardian of the forest, while others whisper of a curse. But one thing is certain, the woods hold secrets, whispered only in the language of shadows and moonlight.